I've experienced people who visit Tucson and say this is exactly what they've been looking for. Others visit and say, this is it. Same city, same weather, same mountains, completely different reactions. If you're considering Tucson as a second home or even a full-time move later, this difference matters more than price or square footage, because whether Tucson feels peaceful or slow has very little to do with Tucson and almost everything to do with you. I work with a lot of thoughtful buyers, especially second home buyers from larger markets. And the reaction to Tucson tends to split in two different directions. People coming from Chicago, San Francisco, Dallas, Minneapolis, Denver, they're used to density, energy, calendar momentum. Tucson does not compete on energy. It operates on rhythm. And if you misread that difference, you don't regret the house. You regret the pace. And to be fair, not every part of Tucson feels exactly the same. Living in central Tucson feels different than Oro Valley. Oro Valley feels different than Catalina Foothills. The Catalina Foothills feel different than Green Valley. Green Valley feels different than Dove Mountain. And Casa Adobes has a rhythm all its own. But even with those differences, Tucson as a whole tends to operate at a slower pace than most larger metro areas. That's where people either relax into it or resist it. Let me make this specific. When people say Tucson feels slow, they usually mean one of three things. One example would be this. You go out to dinner on a Tuesday night in the Catalina Foothills. The parking lot isn't packed, the restaurant isn't buzzing, the waiter isn't rushing, no one is trying to turn your table. If you're used to North Scottsdale or Chicago's West Loop energy, that can feel underwhelming. If you're used to fighting for reservations, traffic, and noise levels that require leaning across the table, it can feel like a relief. Same dinner, different nervous system. Another example, you're driving across town at 3:30 in the afternoon. There's traffic, but it's not aggressive traffic, no honking, no lane wars, no constant tension, just steady movement. For some people, that reads as nothing's happening here. For others, it reads as I'm not on the edge anymore. Or here's another example. You buy in the Catalina Foothills or Dove Mountain, thinking you'll be close enough to everything, and then realize most evenings are quiet. There aren't constant pop-up events, no endless nightlife options, no feeling that you're missing something every night of the week. Some second home buyers feel calm. Others quietly start booking more trips back home, back to their primary city, just to feel that stimulation again. And that's the difference. Here's where it becomes real. A couple buys a second home in Oro Valley after spending a few weeks here in February. The weather is perfect. Mountains are incredible. The restaurants are easy. Everything feels calm. It feels like the antidote to their primary residence. Year one, they love it. Year two, something subtle shifts. One partner leans into the quiet. That's morning walks, coffee on the patio, fewer commitments, slower dinners. The other partner starts to feel restless, not because Tucson is bad, not because they made a financial mistake, but because they didn't realize how much their identity was tied to motion. Now the tension isn't about the house, it's about the pace. And pace misalignment is expensive, emotionally, financially, relationally. That's the part people rarely model before they buy. High net worth second home buyers often underestimate this. Because the house is beautiful, the lot is great, the views are strong, the numbers make sense. The second home exaggerates the city's core personality. You're not living here full time with work structure and routine obligations. You're experiencing the city in concentrated blocks. Someone who thrives on optionality, social density, and constant stimulation, Tucson can feel surprisingly quiet fast. And if you're someone who wants decompression, space, clarity, and room to think, it can feel restorative. That distinction doesn't show up on the MLS. There's another layer to this. People often talk about Tucson as if it's one experience. It isn't. Green Valley feels slower than Oro Valley. Oro Valley feels more structured than the Catalina foothills. The foothills feel different than central Tucson, and Dove Mountain feels different than all of them. Sometimes buyers think they're reacting to Tucson when they're actually reacting to a specific part of Tucson. One reason I encourage people to evaluate the lifestyle first and the house second, because the area compounds, and if the area doesn't fit, the house rarely fixes it. Here's the framework I encourage people to use. I call it the Energy Dependency Test. Ask yourself, do I feel energized because my environment creates momentum for me? Or because I create the momentum for myself? And here's another way to think about it. If I removed my city's stimulation tomorrow, would I still enjoy my day? Or am I borrowing the energy from the environment around me? Because Tucson tends to work best for people who can generate their own momentum. If your environment fuels you, constant events, packed calendars, visible activity, new places to go every weekend, Tucson might feel slower than you expected. If you prefer a self-directed pace, long mornings, defined plans, outdoor routines, and fewer but deeper interactions, Tucson often feels grounding. Neither answer is better, but confusing them creates friction, and the risk isn't that you won't like Tucson. The risk is that you'll buy the right house inside the wrong rhythm. And that's much harder to unwind than people think. For retirees especially, this question becomes sharper. Some retirees thrive here because they're intentionally stepping away from acceleration. Others discover that work was providing more structure, purpose, and stimulation than they realized. When that disappears inside a slower city, the adjustment can feel heavier than expected. Again, not because Tucson failed, but because the structure they were relying on was never replaced. Tucson isn't designed to impress everyone. From what I've noticed, it tends to work best for people who value what it already is. For some people, that's peace. For others, it's discomfort. The mistake isn't choosing Tucson. The mistake is not being clear on how you actually want to live once you're here. If you're considering Tucson as a second home or thinking about moving here long term, and you're not sure how that pace would actually feel for you, that's usually something worth figuring out before you ever start looking at houses. Because this isn't really about price, it isn't about inventory, and it isn't even about the neighborhood first. It's about how you operate day to day and whether the environment supports that or slowly works against it. Most people don't get that wrong immediately, but they do feel it over time. And if you'd like help thinking through that before you make a decision, I've outlined how to approach it below. Thanks for watching.